Something major just happened in the Scott Peterson case, and almost nobody is talking about it. After more than 20 years, one of the most polarizing murder convictions in American history has taken a turn that almost nobody saw coming. A California judge has ruled that Scott Peterson's new habeas corpus petition will move forward, not thrown out, not dismissed, but officially sent back to the state for a reply. And that's huge because in California, fewer than 10% of habeas petitions make it that far. Most are denied instantly without a single hearing or reply. But this time, the court needs answers. And now, 2 decades after Scott Peterson was convicted, the court is left considering if he really could be innocent. Scott Peterson, now 51, is serving life in prison without parole for the murders of his pregnant wife, 27-year-old Laci Peterson, and their unborn son, Connor. He was convicted back in 2004, but Scott has maintained his innocence for more than 20 years. His story? Scott claims that on the morning of Christmas Eve in 2002, he went to test out their new boat, the one that Laci and him had just purchased as a surprise for her stepfather, Ron, who is an avid fisherman. He says he called Laci several times throughout the day, but she never picked up. By the time he got home that afternoon, he'd assumed she had been picked up by her mother to help prepare Christmas Eve dinner, something that he says would have been completely normal. Soon after, Scott played their messages on their answering machine and heard one from Laci's stepfather, asking them to bring whipped cream when they came over. Scott said that message concerned him because it meant if Ron was just leaving that message, that Laci may never have arrived. Scott says he immediately called Laci's mother and asked if Laci was with her. When her mother, Sharon Rocha, replied no, Scott says he started to panic. He told her mother that when he got home, the back door was unlocked and their golden retriever Mackenzie was still in the backyard, wearing his leash. Laci's mother told him to start calling her friends and neighbors while she phoned 911. A short time later, one of the neighbors told Scott that earlier that morning, she had been backing out of her driveway and saw the Petersons' dog Mackenzie wandering the street with his leash still attached, but Laci was nowhere in sight. Adding to the mystery, several neighbors who had spoken to Laci in the past claimed that they had seen her walking that morning with Mackenzie around the neighborhood, supporting the idea that she was alive and outside the home after Scott had already left for his fishing trip. But despite those early accounts, investigators immediately honed in on Scott as their primary suspect. Then, in what many now view as an unprofessional and damaging move, police publicly announced Scott's exact alibi location, even revealing where his boat had launched that day. Local newspapers went so far as to print maps showing where authorities planned to search for bodies. That announcement, critics argue, may have opened the door for whoever actually abducted Laci to later place her remains in that same area, effectively ending the search for any other suspects, as police were already convinced that Scott Peterson had dumped her there. Not long after Laci's disappearance, it came out that Scott was having an affair with a woman named Amber Fry. That revelation became the focal point, and many believe what ultimately swayed the jury to convict Scott. By the time Laci and Connor's bodies were found 4 months later, in the very bay where Scott said he had been, public opinion was cemented. To most people and the police, it looked like an open and shut case. However, adding another layer to the mystery, a burglary occurred across the street from the Peterson home around the very same time frame that Laci disappeared, something that would later become one of the most disputed points in the entire case. In 2005, Scott was sent to death row, but he has always maintained his innocence. Then in 2021, the California Supreme Court overturned his death sentence, ruling that the original trial judge improperly dismissed jurors based solely on their views about the death penalty, a serious due process violation. Fast forward to January of 2024, when the Los Angeles Innocence Project announced they were officially representing Scott Peterson. They filed a nearly 1,000-page motion arguing that his constitutional rights, both state and federal, were violated, and that he has never been granted access to key evidence from his own trial. They asked for that access and for permission to conduct new DNA testing on several pieces of evidence that could prove critical. Most of those requests were denied, except for one, a 15-inch piece of duct tape recovered from Laci's pants. That tape was retested under court order last year, and the results remain sealed, known only to the judge, prosecution, and defense. Then in October of last year, Judge Hill granted the LA Innocence Project's request to review nearly 45 pieces of previously withheld evidence, calling some of it, quote, potentially exculpatory. Since then, things were remotely quiet until earlier this year. On August 4th of 2025, the Los Angeles Innocence Project officially filed Scott Peterson's new habeas petition, a massive 650-page long document, plus thousands of pages of exhibits. Judge Hill was expected to respond by October 4th, just a few weeks ago, but given the size of the filing, along with ongoing disputes over which documents would remain sealed, things were understandably delayed. But this past week, the judge finally issued an order, and it's been the update we've been waiting for. All right, so let's talk about what happened this week, because it is huge. So on November 5th, Judge Elizabeth Hill of the San Mateo County Superior Court officially issued an amended request for informal response. In simple terms, that means that the court has looked at the Los Angeles Innocence Project massive habeas filing, and instead of throwing it out, Judge Hill said, no, the state needs to answer to this. So that is a big deal because, again, like I said, most habeas petitions in California are immediately denied. So they don't even make it to this stage. It tells us that the court believes there's at least some legal merit to what the Los Angeles Innocence Project has filed. So this isn't just a case of another inmate filing nonsense from prison. This is a massive evidence-based document that the judge clearly believes deserves an answer. So let me read you part of the order directly so you can see it for yourself. The judge wrote, quote, "This court, having received and reviewed petitioner's verified petition for writ of habeas corpus and accompanying memorandum of points and authorities and attached exhibits filed August 4th, 2025, hereby requests an informal response to the petition. Pursuant to California Rule of Court and in view of the prior filing of pleadings by respondent in the First District Court of Appeal on May 1st, 2025, the court orders the informal response served and filed within 15 days of service of this order unless application for extension of time is made and good cause shown." And then it says petitioner has 15 days from service of the informal response to file any reply unless application for extension of time is made and good cause shown. Dated November 5th, 2025. So what does that mean in plain English? It means the state of California, specifically the Attorney General's office, now has 15 days to file their reply. So they'll have to respond to the main claims made in the habeas petition, the claims of Brady violations, the young blood issues, and the allegations of destroyed and withheld evidence on top of new scientific updates and that information, which I covered at length in a prior episode about the petition, and I'll post that down below. Now, this is important. This doesn't mean that the judge has ruled in Scott Peterson's favor yet, not at all. What it means is the petition has cleared a huge procedural hurdle. Once the state files their response, Judge Hill will read it along with any possible replies. And then from that point, Scott Peterson and his team will have 15 days to reply to that. Then she'll read both of them and she will decide whether it will move on to the next phase, which would be an order to show cause or a potential evidentiary hearing, unless she just throws the whole thing out. So that's the stage where the judge would hear live testimony, consider new evidence, and potentially reopen parts of the case. So right now, we're not at that hearing yet. This is just a step before we get there, if we get there. And honestly, this moment is validating for so many people who work on the case. It proves that what the LA Innocence Project has filed wasn't just speculation or conspiracy talk. The court itself recognizes that there's substance here worth reviewing. That is not all that's happening here, because as the court was reviewing the habeas petition, the court was also flooded with some filings. It was a rapid back and forth between the Los Angeles Innocence Project and the state over what information and evidence would be made public. At the center were a few confidential witness names tied to the burglary across the street from the Peterson home, an event that, again, took place the same time frame that Laci disappeared. So the LA Innocence Project asked to keep those names sealed to protect living witnesses, but the state pushed back, accusing the defense of hiding information, and filed a motion to strike, asking the court to toss out sections of Peterson's filings. So Judge Hill read it all and filed an order on November 5th, and she denied the state's motion to strike. She allowed limited sealing to protect witness identities and ensured unredacted exhibits remain available to the court and the state. So in other words, it was a careful, balanced order, one that leaned slightly toward the defense on confidentiality without handicapping the prosecution's review. Now, here's what really stood out to me personally, and any legal experts who are watching this, correct me if I'm wrong, but from everything I've read, Judge Hill didn't have to rule on that yet. She could have delayed that decision until after the state filed its response, the informal response to the habeas. I'm reading that most judges maybe would have done that if they were planning to toss it out, but Judge Hill didn't do that. Instead, she took her time to read through every argument, weigh both sides, and issue a thoughtful written order. So to me, that shows me that she is very engaged. She is not treating this like a case that she plans to immediately toss aside. That is my opinion. In fact, some might say that by choosing to rule now, it's almost like a signal that she expects this case to keep moving and that she's already laying the groundwork for what she might decide next. So yes, the request for an informal response is technically procedural. But to me, it seems like a major one, especially when you consider this secondary ruling. It shows the court is taking Peterson's habeas very seriously. And taking these two things together, these rulings tell me one thing. This case seems far from over. Now, because there were two separate orders filed, and we've already covered the first in its entirety, the order for the state to give an informal response, but for the second order, addressing the defense's motion to file unredacted exhibits under seal and the state's motion to strike, that deserves its own video breakdown. So I'm going to break this up into two parts. This is the part one that we just talked about, and part two, coming soon, we're going to talk about because it's 17 pages long and absolutely packed with interesting details. But for now, I just wanted to get this update out quickly because this was pretty huge news. So in part two of this, we'll go line by line through that second order, talk about who those witnesses are believed to be, and why their statements could reshape this entire case. And then, of course, we will get back to Scott Peterson's declaration. I know we're kind of breaking those apart, and episodes 4, 5, and 6 are still on the way, so we'll get back to those as well. But I want to hear from you what you think about this. Do you think that this ruling shows that Scott Peterson might finally get his fair shot at justice? Or do you think the original jury got it right? What do you make of Judge Hill's decision? Is it the start of something bigger or just a formality? Now, before we wrap up, I just want to take a quick second to say something from the heart. As we're heading into the holidays, Thanksgiving is right around the corner, and I have been thinking a lot about gratitude. This case in particular always hits me really hard around the holidays because it's heartbreaking for me to think about, Laci's pregnancy journal, how excited she was to have the baby, so excited to start her new life ahead, only to have it cut just weeks after Thanksgiving. I'm always reminded of that, and it reminds me to be grateful for what I have and for the time I have, and this amazing community that lets me share these stories with all of you. And I know this is just still a small channel. I'm getting very close to 4,000 subscribers, and that's entirely because of all your support, your generosity, and your willingness to look deeper at these stories with me. I know many of you have been sharing these videos with your friends and family, and I cannot tell you how much that means to me and my family. Every share, every comment helps these stories reach more people who may never have heard them otherwise. So thank you. And to those of you who are struggling right now, maybe financially, emotionally, or just trying to hold it all together during this holiday season, or really during this season in our history, I am right there with you. My heart is with you. Consider this a big virtual Thanksgiving hug from me to you. Now remember to let me know your thoughts about the updates in this case down in the comment section down below. I really do read every single one of your comments, and I love hearing all of your perspectives. And if you're new here and you've gotten any use out of this video, please take a second to subscribe so we don't lose each other, especially before my part 2 of this drops. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Be careful out there.